This week on Return to Wisdom, I sit down with Kallie, a bioethicist, women's health advocate, and unapologetically bold voice in some of today's most heated cultural conversations.
Soon, sex will be totally just for fun, and that the only way that people will responsibly create children is through these technologies.
Kallie isn't afraid to challenge the narratives that shape our lives, from fertility tech to family structures to the myths we've been sold about what it means to be a liberated woman.
When you are doing IVF, you have invited a whole slew of people into bed with you. It was never about infertility. For him, it was finding out who was God.
Whether you agree or not, you'll walk away thinking differently.
Every step we're taking these days, it seems like, gets us further from what I would like to see promoted, which would be like a restorative reproductive model.
Now join me in giving a warm welcome to Kallie. Wow, Kashia, how great is the quality of your new podcast, Return to Wisdom? Oh, mate, I know. I have been recording at Byron Bay's premium content and podcast recording studio, Pod Byron. They are epic. It's new, it's fresh, it's legit, as you can see. If you want to upskill your brand, if you want to create a course online, this is the place to do it. Jump on at podbyron.com and be sure to check the show notes for a sneaky little discount on your first session. Pod Byron is where it's at. You! Before we get into today's show, I firstly want to thank you for being here. It is because you tune in each week that I'm able to continue on, and I really appreciate your support. Secondly, if you enjoy the content, please head on over to the homepage of the show. Hit subscribe, like, share, and please review the channel. It would mean the world. This is a small way you can contribute to better guests and greater conversations. You're listening to Return to Wisdom with Kashia. Welcome, everyone, to Return to Wisdom. Today, I have Kallie in the studio. Kallie is the Executive Director of the Centre for Bioethics and Culture. She is a nurse and a researcher, filmmaker, and fierce advocate of ethical practices in medicine, especially when it comes to women, children, and reproductive technologies. Welcome, Kallie.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here, and I love that introduction. I'm gonna have to steal that. But thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, this is our second chat. Our first chat happened back on over at the Road to Wisdom podcast. So if anyone wants to have a listen to that, it's over there. But I am really excited to have you here. I mean, I did recently have Dr. Aaron Cariati on, who you know well, and we talked about we covered a lot of ground, but afterwards I was still like, I have more questions. Like this is just such a wormhole. This whole area of assisted reproductive technologies is such a wormhole, and especially with so much in the pipeline that is set to be introduced. And with the introduction of AI, like it's just it feels like it could get out of, like it's already out of hand, isn't it? We're already there out of hand, and it just feels like it could get so much more dystopian unless we're having these conversations and talking about where this could go and how we kind of need to put the brakes on if we can. So thank you for coming in. And
of course. Yeah. This is an issue that deserves much thought. And so far, we haven't done enough thoughts on the things that we're already doing on a global scale: international surrogacy, egg donation, sperm, all of that. We're just now learning about donor-conceived individuals because they're finally growing up and they're now adults, and we're learning about their experiences. And then now we're adding AI and all kinds of crazy new technologies to a system that's already really broken and underregulated.
Yeah, and underregulated, I think, is the buzzword at the moment. I mean, I mean, I looked at a few stories that have come up recently here in Australia because last time we spoke, it was very much based in the US, but some of the stuff going on here in Australia is pretty wild. And the first case being one of, I guess, a serial sperm donor from the 1980s and one of his biological children discovering that she could potentially be one of 700 siblings, like half siblings. Yeah, and I just found that case so like heartbreaking, but you can't even really wrap your head around those numbers. And she did some investigation herself, and what she came to find was that back in the day, back then, you could get $10 for every time you donated sperm. And so he was under 7 different aliases giving sperm, I think, in 10 different locations. And each of those locations would use one donation for 10 different families. And if those families wanted to create more than one child, so 700 was like a conservative guess of potential siblings in Australia.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'm guessing this is all probably within a fairly close radius. Unregulated seems like a pretty appropriate word.
Yeah. And as shocking as that is, and that is absolutely shocking, but it doesn't surprise me. I've had so many guests on my previous podcast, Venus Rising, and then other people that I've talked to in the work that I do talk about the same kind of numbers of finding relatives that are out there, with, and just like the shock that comes with, like, I think one guest I had on the podcast talked about, like, she just literally fell off the bar stool that she was sitting on when she found out, one, that she was donor conceived, because that's probably the first shock, is finding out if your parents haven't been forthright, or you just weren't told, and then finding out that you have relatives up in the 700s. I had a lady actually from Australia on in 2021, I think. Her name was Gail Pascoe, and she was finding out that her young daughter, and she just started the search, her young daughter had over 100 half siblings. And it was supposed, she was under the guise that, you could only donate so many times to only so many family members, and this would never be the case. You might still have, maybe 10 to 20 half siblings, but even that's like a big number to comprehend for a child and then adult. But even in 2021, I was having this conversation about these serial donors and children who have hundreds of half siblings.
Yeah, I mean, and that is huge. And I think I want to be very clear, because now to donate your sperm, it has to be, and eggs, it has to be for altruistic reasons. The selling of eggs and sperm is illegal. However, I do believe that it starts getting a little bit muddier, because travel costs can be covered, and other costs that aren't directly for your gametes could be subsidized or covered, which, I mean, incentivizes those who don't mind having so many children out there to become serial donors, which is...
Remind me, in Australia, is anonymity still allowed, or is that off the table now?
Well, I actually don't know. However, this woman found out through 23andMe. I think she knew that she was donor conceived, but then when her mother passed, she went on 23andMe, and that's when she started finding siblings. But then when she contacted the clinic, or the multiple clinics that her biological father had said that he donated to, they wouldn't give out any information, and I think, paperwork maybe back then wasn't as
sure.
Yeah.
I think it's still terrible though. That's the thing. Like when I interviewed Gail in 2021, her daughter was young. I want to say maybe less than 6, 5 or 6 years old. So, this was still, and I think it's still that way. It's still, I think you make a really important point is that people around the world are having to use like a third party software, whatever you would call Ancestry and Me, but a third party organization or something that was never intended for this purpose it became like the way people who are donor conceived could find family members. And to me, that is abysmal. Like there should be registries, there should be accurate birth certificates. Like anonymity should be out the window. There should be accurate record keeping. The fact that this man could have several aliases to use and to donate under different names also just speaks to the volume of like nobody's background checking. Nobody's looking into this. As long as there's someone, because also from what I understand in Australia and other places where it's more altruistic, they don't have the numbers of people needing, and I use that word, we should say that, numbers of people wanting egg or sperm donors is going up, but the people who are willing to give of sperm and eggs isn't increasing to meet demand, right? And so I think the fertility industry is just bypassing any type of safeguarding or ethical guidelines just so they can meet demand.
Yeah, it feels like that would be the incentives behind those kind of situations because, it's a bit mind-blowing. And it calls into question so much. As soon as you open that door into the number of children being produced from the one person, it brings up so many more questions. And I mean, one thing that's happening here, or the discussion that is taking place here in Australia, and I would imagine that falling birth rates has a lot to do with this, is to start incentivizing or like commissioning people for their gametes. And being someone who lives in a country where that is currently the situation, how would you caution Australia moving forward if that's what they wanted to do?
Yeah. Well, it's funny that we're talking right now because just last week before our Independence Day, I actually wrote a really lengthy letter to the Australian Law Reform Commission as they requested input and just randomly write them, but as a request for input from people with experience on this topic. But they are, they're talking about reforming or changing laws around egg and sperm donation so that you can start to get paid to give your sperm and eggs, but they're also considering their legal framework around surrogacy. And I think that's what we talked about most on our first time that we talked on the other podcast. But Australia, yeah, I think that they are really looking hard at reforming their laws in the space of what we would call third-party conception. So where we would use someone else's egg or sperm or womb to create a child. And so, in my letter to them from the Center for Bioethics and Culture, it just kind of went through each of their steps and was, urging for them to not allow for the commercialization of third-party reproduction. It is not the way to go. I live in California where buku bucks are being made in third-party conception, and we are having the same issues. And yeah, it's definitely not the way to go. They're at the very center of these conversations, and I often don't talk about it enough, I find. And when I'm preparing for interviews or thinking about interviews, I always talk about the risks to women who might sell their eggs or to surrogate mothers. But at the beginning of all of this, when we start talking about money, we are commodifying a child. Like at the very, before you even take a step further in the discussion, if we allow money to exchange for these services, um, we've already started the process of commodifying a child who had no say, who won't know that they're going to have 100 siblings, maybe. But so I guess I just want to put that on the forefront is like, we have to center the conversation around the child's rights, and the child that's going to be created. We have to start focusing on their rights, wants, needs, everything.
And the situation that we are creating to bring them to being. Dr. Cariati did bring that up. And it's actually something that I think in my conversation with Katie Faust was huge. I mean, so often the focus is on the parents' wants and the parents' desires, and like I absolutely empathize with any woman or man who wants to become a mother or father. And I think originally all of this technology was brought to the forefront to help those people, but what has been left at the wayside is how many ways that this technology has been able to be used in much more nefarious ways, and you know, with extremely questionable ethical and moral standards. So yeah, I think something that you demonstrated beautifully just then, and something that Katie Faust highlights, is let's have a look at it from that child's perspective. I guess a lot of people would then ask or say, well, the child wouldn't exist if it weren't for don't we want them to exist, and if they're going to parents that would love them and are ready for them, like, isn't this something beautiful? Isn't this something that we want?
Wow. Yeah. That's a good perspective. But we have to remember that even though someone may desire with their whole and let me pause for a second and say that that question is how the fertility industry likes to present themselves, is like this they give this image of a couple, right, that's been longing forever to have children. They'd be the best parents in the world. One, we know that that isn't all who shows up at a fertility clinic's door, first and foremost. I just did an interview with a woman who's a surrogate mother. I always bring back to surrogacy somehow. I'm sorry, apologize ahead of time.
It is
but
part
I
of
just
third
did
party, so
it is. Just did an interview with a woman, and it was actually just featured in the U.S. Publication, The Daily Wire, where a couple had 20 children removed from their house from third-party conception. They were having multiple surrogate women pregnant at a time. CPS is involved now. The FBI is investigating. But I'm just saying that because it's not always that image of this couple who really longs to have a child who we all know would be excellent parents. That's not the only type of people who would be using this technology. And then secondly, again, we don't have a right to a child no matter how desperately we want something. We don't have a right to a lot of things in this world that we may desperately want. And this is no exception. Nowhere do we have a right to create or own another human. I mean, embryos in the United States are considered property. At the very kind of basic, that gets really muddied really quickly in law, but basically that's what they are. They are property. And we don't have a right to that. And so, that's a hard question to answer. And I have friends who have used surrogacy, who have used these technologies, and, it's a painful cross to bear to not be able to have your own biological children. But even in the case of egg donation and sperm donation, you're not having your own biological children. And so as hard of a thing to say out loud, it doesn't, there's no right way to do this. And a longing can't justify all of the issues that there are with this.
And as someone who has interviewed quite a lot of children who are the result of sperm or egg donation or third-party reproduction, I mean, what are the issues that you see come to light in those circumstances?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I see is the identity struggle that comes with it. Some that I've spoke with kind of have this aha moment where I'm trying to think of his name, if it was Nick or if it was another gentleman I spoke with. But he was really, really science brain, really into engineering, really focused on that. And the father that was that raised him was just so vastly different than him. And he always kind of felt this like interesting, like, man, what? There's just not. And then when he found out that he was donor conceived and then found his biological father, it was like meeting, like looking in a mirror. Not only did they look similar, but they had similar interests. Things just started to click for him. And so in talking with people who are donor conceived, that's like one of the biggest things is this idea of this, their whole world, their whole identity really shifts. And if you think about someone finding out maybe in their teen years when you're really starting to form who your identity is, how catastrophic that could be. And then also the other thing that they talk about is the lack of access to important medical history. So even if they know that they're donor conceived, when you go to your primary care physician or you're getting a health history, they ask about, your mother's side, your father's side. And if you have an entire side of information that you don't know about, that could have devastating consequences for your own health and your own future and the health of your own children, right? Like, this is not just like a single moment in time. This is, you are affecting generations, people.
Yeah. And I mean, again, these are just not concepts that were considered at all prior to the introduction of this technology. I mean, I can't say that they weren't considered and just pushed to the side, but it's something that I guess no one really delves into or talks about when you're talking about the heartbreaking situation of infertility.
And it is absolutely heartbreaking, and I don't want to downplay that at all, because that's devastating. To want to have a child, such a good desire, right? That's like the best desire, to have and raise children of your own. Absolutely heartbreaking. But the nagging in the back of my head about all of the things that can go wrong, all of the lives that are affected, just all of that, I can't help but to think about the health risks that we're doing. All of that, it's just still, I can't let it go.
Yeah.
So
and I guess using Katie Faust's framework, it's like if we as the parents do move forward with this because of our desires, it is actually one situation where we're actually passing the hard of infertility. We're passing, for us it's the infertility, but we're passing on to our children the hard of not knowing their biological parents or not understanding really where they came from, not having a real family tree and being able to research the history. And I don't know, some people might not find that that's an important thing, but I think having the option is.
Yeah. Well, and if you think about too, just what you said reminded me, when you think about like Ancestry and 23andMe, those came about because people had a deep desire to understand their lineage, where they came from. their genetic roots way beyond what mom and dad and aunt and uncle and grandma and grandpa could tell them, right? That came from a market of people wanting to know more about their identities, not less. And so when we are creating children and stripping them of half of their lineage or half of their knowing, or maybe even in some cases they use I think it's more rare, but a donor, a sperm donor and an egg donor, you are completely erasing this person's knowledge about themselves. You're not even giving them a foundation to start from. And then I think I mentioned briefly just like the state of affairs for birth certificates too. And that's something I really want to champion for, and I've been trying to, is the fact that our birth certificates at a minimum have accurate representation of who is involved in the creating of your life. Really, what I feel like in the United States, birth certificates have just become like papers of ownerships. Like who's on the birth certificates, who gets the child, who owns the child, but it's not an actual representation or medical document of someone's actual birth and why they're here. And I think too, I'd like to add, in speaking with, and actually he's in our film, Anonymous Father's Day, because we have several films on this space, and they're older, but they are still so pertinent and applicable. But he says in our film, it's you can be happy about being born and still question your conception. Like, that's okay. It's a hard place to be, but it's totally okay to question your conception and still be happy to be here. Those aren't separate things,
Well, and I guess too, like, you can absolutely love the parents that you grew up with and be so grateful for everything that they've given you, but also want to know the people who biologically are part of you. So yeah, and I think that's where it gets really twisted, because I guess feelings get hurt that it must be one way or the other, or that there's like a lack of appreciation there if you have this burning desire to know your biological parents. So, and all things that we need to consider when making these decisions. So, thank you for bringing that up. So if we're looking at, and speaking of films that you've created, Exploitation is one of them, and I actually just brushed up on it and watched it again recently, and I think is really relevant for now, while in Australia we are looking at commissioning women for their eggs. That's
like the biggest, like, we're talking about commissioning and sperm donation. I use this in quotes. Anyone's listening, it's not donation. I don't care if it's altruistic. It's not a donation. And this is, like, again, not in the case of sperm, but definitely in the case of eggs. There's a real exploitive nature to this, especially for females, because compensation, at least in the United States, can be quite a bit, depending on the type of person you are, right? So women who are from Ivy League educations, or maybe certain height, or maybe know 4 languages, are going to be targeted more than someone who has qualities that the population might not deem as important or as optimal. And so there's a real risk when we allow for the commercialization of this, for women to be exploited in this way, young women, because egg donors are young, typically college age, because young eggs are better eggs. We know this. Egg quality deteriorates with time. So this is a young woman's life that we're asking her to sacrifice and to give her own children to somebody else.
Could you please explain to my audience why egg donation, or what egg donation looks like? How do we retrieve eggs from these women?
Sure. So typically how this starts is we've got to control her cycle, right? And so there will be daily hormone injections to make your ovaries grow multiple follicles. So a follicle is the home of your gamete, of your egg cell. And so the hormones you take, daily injections, will cause you to grow multiple of those, because in a normal cycle, one, maybe two, often in the cases of twins or whatnot, two follicles will release an egg. But typically just one follicle every month releases an egg. But what we do is we artificially stimulate those ovaries, making a woman take daily hormone injections, causing multiple follicles to grow. And then there's also medications that they can take to prevent premature ovulation, because they want those follicles to not ovulate, because the doctors are going to go in and extract the egg. So they wouldn't want you to ovulate before they had an opportunity to do that.
And by ovulate, you mean like the egg releases from the follicle?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Exactly.
We want the maturation of lots of eggs, and for them to stay within the follicle, like contained within the follicle.
Absolutely. You've got it. And then about 36 hours before a scheduled retrieval, they will give a trigger shot, which is commonly Lupron, which is an off-label drug for this purpose, which is the same drug that's used to castrate men, pedophiles. It's the same drug used in the gender identity, the medicalization of changing sex. But anyway, I digress. Lupron's typically one of those drugs in there. And so that trigger shot will mature the eggs and get them ready for collection. And the timing of that is really important, because about 36 hours afterwards is when they will do the egg retrieval procedure, which usually happens at the clinic under sedation or anesthesia. And the doctor goes in and literally takes a needle guided through by ultrasound and just goes through the vagina, by the wall of the vagina into the ovary, and just suction out each of the follicle has fluid in it that the egg lives in. And so they suck out that fluid from each follicle. And by sucking out that fluid, that's how they retrieve the egg. And then that fluid then is then handed off to the embryologist, who will look under the microscope and see how many eggs are retrieved. So that is like the very basic version of it.
I did actually want to ask though, because so that would be the process for egg donation. In terms of IVF and egg retrieval for, say, I wanted to freeze my eggs, which is now quite popular.
A hot topic.
It is a hot topic. Is it the same procedure?
Same procedure.
Okay.
What might happen differently is what would happen with the embryologist afterwards, whether or not they're going to, freeze those eggs right away. If they're planning on an IVF, maybe they're wanting to create embryos right away, so pair them up with sperm. So that's where it would change and be different. Mm-hmm. But the set, but it's going to be pretty much the same. They might also have a woman go on birth control or some other medication also prior to starting to stimulate the follicles to sync up a woman with maybe even a surrogate mother or another woman. And so there might be little nuanced changes, but for the most part, that is it.
Are there
regardless of the intention for those eggs.
Okay. And are there any risks to these procedures?
Yeah, there are. And the big problem and the difference is that, one, we have no database, at least in the United States, for women who freeze or donate their eggs. And again, these are going to be younger women. Women who freeze their eggs, they're trying to target the women. They're trying to target women younger and younger, right? Because again, your egg quality is better when you're younger. And so the harm there is that these women will respond to these hormones better and in a different way than women who are taking these, who are having trouble with their fertility, who are doing IVF for themselves. And so the reason I bring that up is a lot of researchers, more research, I won't say a lot, but more research has been done in women who are seeking out these technologies because they are having trouble with fertility. And so that's a very different population than a healthy young woman who is donating, selling her eggs or freezing her eggs. And so that's why I really like to show the difference there, because women who are going to IVF, again, struggling with infertility, probably older, other things. This young woman is typically healthy, and she's going to respond to these hormones in a better way than someone who's going through fertility treatment. The other big thing, like I said, is there are really no longitudinal studies that exist that follow these women from the time that they've donated or froze their eggs. And again, these are the same, they're undergoing the same treatment. So you can lump them together if you want. But you might find that someone who is an egg donor is a higher risk because she might become a serial egg donor, right? Especially if she's doing it for financial reasons. She might go through several 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 cycles of donating her eggs, whereas you might not see that in a woman who freezes their egg. Although fertility clinics are starting to say, oh, well, if you give half of your eggs retrieved, we'll pay for the cycle, right? So we'll freeze half of your eggs if you give half of them away. Well, then that woman is going to have to undergo multiple rounds because she won't have enough eggs to thaw. Because it takes a lot of numbers, and I'm talking a lot. I really should slow down because I keep getting ahead of myself and I keep digging myself a deeper hole. And that's not what I'm trying to do. What I'm trying to do is basically say there are no known long-term risks to a woman, whether that be her risks for cancer, whether that's her own fertility. We don't really know the long-term risks of freezing your eggs or donating your eggs once or multiple times. We do know that there are short-term risks such as PCOS. That's probably the one that most people are familiar with. The problem is it's really, so none of these clinics are regulated well. We've talked about this already. And so when a woman may have PCOS, she may report that back. It may not show up till after, and it may not be reported at all. So the number we say about 10%, but that number to me doesn't mean anything. It's hogwash because it's underreported. But PCOS can have a whole slew of problems, from just weight gain all the way up to death. I mean, people can die from PCOS. In Exploitation, the film you talked about, we see the stories of several women who had lasting effects from this, losing their own ovaries, having a stroke, losing their own fertility. It can be really devastating. There are also risks for the invasive procedure itself. They're less likely, but if they are unfortunate enough to have a complication, the complications can be severe. So the procedure itself, complications don't happen too often, but when they do happen, they're quite severe. So things like infection, bleeding, those types of things. So it's definitely not without risks. And I think the part that really bothers me, again, is this lack of longitudinal follow-up to know what we are doing to women long term. What are we doing to their own infertility? What are we doing to, are they just having hormonal imbalances later? Do they have a risk for cancer later? My hunch is yes. But women who go into these clinics to donate or freeze, they're often told, oh, there are no known long-term health risks. And in her mind, and even in my mind, you kind of lose that known. There's no known long-term health risk, right? And they're like, oh, there's none known. And they automatically assume that people are probably looking for those if there are. So then they're safe. There's no long-term risks. Not to mention the idea of later realizing that you might have children out there, right? Like when you sell your eggs and you're 22 in college and you're scraping by, and um, you decide to go sell your eggs, and then you are 30 and you start a family of your own and you start to have your own children, and you start to wonder, do I have any other children out there that are related to me? Not to mention those types of issues.
Yeah, I think like one of the things that you highlighted so well is the introduction of iatrogenic harm to women who are well and healthy. And uh, one of the parallels that I saw, because I'm really odd and have been bombarded with the information of like OnlyFans and that like grooming I don't know, situation that's happening out there on the internet. The same women in America that are targeted for escort services and OnlyFans and making money this way are the same demographic that are targeted for egg selling or donation. And I think that's really ick. There's a really big issue there. And I mean, my assumption is, and this is from personal experience, when you are that age, you are very carefree, but also much more willing to be enticed into doing things when there's a massive payoff at the end of it. And the thought process perhaps isn't quite there for the repercussions of those actions and what this means in the future and what does it mean to future you. I mean, it's the age where you feel immortal and you're not thinking about, how is this going to impact me
Right.
when I want to have a family, when I do start having children, or when for myself, I didn't really consider, well, and you can't because you haven't had children, but I didn't really consider the impact of what having my own child was going to be. And if I already had so many children out there, like that would really psychologically affect me. And I would imagine a lot of women do feel that way once they start their own family. So I just went all over the place there, but there are a few red flags, I guess, in the way that women are being targeted for.
And they don't realize that they're not patients, right? So when a woman goes to a fertility clinic, she's dealing with nurses, medical assistants, maybe they might see a doctor. Some don't, which is right. It's kind of odd. If you're giving informed consent, you might want to speak to the provider providing care. But they're surrounded by medical professionals in this clinic type setting and very much feel like patients, but they're not. And so when they start to have health issues, they're not taken seriously. They're punted. And then when they walk out the door after the donation or the extraction, they're lost in history, medical history. We don't know what happens to them. And so I think that's also something to point out is there's this mindset of I'm in a medical facility being treated by medical professionals, but really they're not. They're not patients. And I think that is important for the young mind. I think that we don't think about that. Like you said, like young women who are going in, they have to think of, like they're listening to medical professionals, trusting what they're saying. But those medical professionals don't really have their interests at heart. They have the family who wants the eggs and
you're the product. Like you're the product. And this is what happens, I feel, when we commission our body parts. Like you're the product, and no one puts it in those terms, which it's a misnomer. Like we're not revealing the whole picture when we recruit.
Right. And we talked a little bit about, I meant to bring this up because we were talking about, this happening in the 80s and talking about the family that's always been longing to have a family and kind of the origins of all of this. But when I first started out looking at this stuff and in this space, I often thought like, surely this started in a place of people just wanting to help those who are infertile. This started not as a population crisis issue that it's turned into, or single parents wanting children. It started probably in my mind. I'm like, oh, this had to have started from a good place. But then I did some more digging, and I didn't realize that the very first insemination, or one of the first insemination, was done by Dr. Pancoast. And he used, without the woman's knowledge, one of his medical students' sperm. And to me, that just kind of like removed this veil of like, oh, this was kind of creepy to begin with. And then I did a little bit more digging, and the man who invented, if you will, or did the first successful IVF case with Louise Brown on one of her birthdays, 25th birthday or whatnot, he had said that it was never just about, and I'm going to botch the quote so you can go find it and like find the real quote for people who are listening, but some along this lines, but it was never about infertility. For him, it was finding out who was God. Was it him, or him and scientists in the lab, or was it like actual God? And then when he was able to succeed with IVF, he was like, no, I am God. So it just like really dark, shady beginnings. And I was like, okay, well,
gives you a few answers there. That is really scary, because I mean, how often, I mean, I talk a lot about the medical industry and allopathic medicine, and you see a lot of doctors with a God complex, and here is where that came from. Like a doctor with a God complex. Yep, here we go. Tick that off the list. Yeah, wild. I had about 4 different things that came up to mind, and I've lost them all with that quote, because it's just like, oh God, really?
I feel like that's been my brain
since having babies.
Yeah. It's been a while. I like popcorn all over, and I went on that tangent with egg donation, but so I get it.
Yeah,
you're among good company.
I feel like by a year postpartum, and I think the last time we spoke, we were actually both pregnant with our most recent babies, so go us. But I feel like a year postpartum is usually when my words come back and some of the fog lifts, but this time has been a bit of a slower recovery, so I do tend to.
I'm at 15 months, so I should be I'm hoping it's coming back soon.
Something that I actually was thinking about the other day, because as I was doing research for this interview, I was talking to my husband quite a bit, and something that I just don't hear anyone speak of is the intimacy of conception. And I know that it sounds really weird, like, or obvious, like, conception is a very intimate act. But I mean, in conception, when it is done the old school way, it's generally 2 people in love are sharing a really intimate experience. When you're growing that child in your womb, it's a very intimate. I'm that's the guy that I'm half creating this child with. And something that I just can't wrap my head around is that if you were to use a third party for that, not having a connection to the person that's half growing, it seems like a really bizarre, I don't know, like something that I feel should have more consideration than what we give it. It's become quite clinical, I guess, and like sterile. And when we removed the miracle and awe of conception by putting it in a lab, we also like removed this part of intimacy and I can't find the exact words for it, but it's something that I was like, oh, why Why isn't that considered when we go into these third party
Mhm.
reproductive technologies?
Yeah. Well, and not only has it been clinicalized and just kind of has happened, it's now like being celebrated in a way, right? Like, so there's a new company out called Orchid and Orchid Health, maybe. And they are a company that will help with all of the embryo selection and grading. And they basically look at your entire embryo's like genome and pick the best embryo. And one of their, I don't know if it was a founder, one of their spokespersons had said that sex is for fun, IVF is for making babies. And this thought also was said on a recent 60 Minutes episode by one of the fertility doctors in the show, was saying that soon sex will be totally just for fun, and that the only way that people will responsibly create children is through these technologies. And so just I feel like hits the nail on the head with what you're saying, and it's being celebrated as such and promoted as the responsible way to have children, which is a lot of people, I think, have been giving a little bit of pushback there, but now you can select embryos based on a myriad of things. What used to be technologies that would help prevent certain diseases have now become more of like an enhancement opportunity rather than an avoidance. And so I went a little bit of a step further than what you were talking about with going ahead and talking about embryo selection and that sort of thing. But it's that idea though of like sex is for fun, and this technology or any technology is the way that we create families. But we're absolutely sterilizing the process. And I think I've spoken to some folks who talk about, when you are doing IVF, you have invited a whole slew of people into bed with you, because you've invited the fertility doctor who's taking care of you and treating you and providing medical care. You've invited an embryologist who's looking at the eggs, the sperm, and the embryo. You have invited a lot of people. And then in the case of like you were talking to, of third-party conception, where you might use an egg or sperm donor and then also maybe a surrogate mother, we've really removed that intimate biological connection. And I think nothing points to that more than surrogacy, where we literally rip a child away from the only home it's known. So not only do you erase that beautiful contact between a man and a woman to have a child, but you create this child in a lab and then you place it into another woman. And then the second most inhumane thing, where you are taking that baby from the only home it's ever known and causing just, well, so much harm. I mean, we know that a child hears a mother's voice, heartbeat, emotions, all of that plays into the development of that child in utero. And then to deny that child even skin to skin or a bond and an attachment to the person that's carried him or her, I think has lasting implications on a person and then our society as a whole.
Well, and how much information is coming out now about the importance of that connection. I think we actually said this in our first chat together, where there is just an onslaught of scientific information coming out about like the hormonal response between the mother and child. And obviously it's more, we speak more about the mother and not so much about the child, because again, ethics around testing these things in a child, I'm sure, is questionable. But we like the more and more research is coming out about how important these connections are and how early a child is, developing their personality almost and their attachment styles. So it's and we know it comes at a certain point in gestation now. I can only imagine that give us a few more decades and we'll probably find out that actually that happens at conception. Like, who knows? Like we'll start, actually it happens when that woman not under the influence of birth control gets pheromones from that man, and that is what is like starting that biological connection that leads to procreation, that leads to a child. So I think there's so many processes that leads to the conception of a child that, I mean, our bodies aren't stupid. we're so clever, and when we're so clever. But like, it's probably the first thing that I thought after I had my baby. I'm like, oh, how clever am I? I made a whole human on
my own from scratch. I can't even bake a cake from scratch, but I can make a human from scratch.
I'll make a whole entire human being. They're quite complicated. But like we are like when everything is working properly, and I that comes from a very sensitive place, but when nature is working properly and we do leave the toxics and the environmental overstimulation and everything out of the picture, there's like this very fluid hormonal dance that our bodies play with other bodies, and that creates, this is what creates human life. And when we you'll never be able to completely translate that in a laboratory. And so when we see people having issues, whether it be from egg donation, or we see people having issues because they were an IVF baby, or they're having complications in their pregnancy because they have become pregnant in IVF, it's like, yeah, because these are the things that we're introducing. I mean, we might be able to circumvent the infertility, but we're introducing iatrogenic harm when, to the child, to the woman, when we're ignoring the reasons for the infertility. So I don't know how I started on that little rant, but I feel like there's so much to this picture that it's so much broader than just that sperm in an egg in a petri dish and then we implant it. That just seems like we're trying to simplify a process that is a whole lot more complicated, and for very specific reasons that we probably just don't know yet.
Right. Well, and we're also starting to even take whatever human part is a part of IVF and the lab, that is starting to be removed. Just, I think last week we saw in the news that the IVF industry was congratulating themselves on this system of fully automated AI robots that were able to successfully perform the fertilization of the human egg and kind of like manufacture the whole process with AI. And so that brings up a whole other Pandora's box of things to consider too. Are AI robots better or worse than human judgment and human hands? And then how will those children feel 10 to 20 years from now when they know that they've been born or they were created by robots, when their genetics were selected by robots and artificial intelligence rather than an embryologist or rather than natural conception? I mean, it just like every step we're taking these days, it seems like gets us further from what I would like to see promoted, which would be like a restorative reproductive model. If we're talking about from your first point, if we're talking about a man and woman couple who has so desperately wants a child that they have been trying for a child, then let's restore them to fertility. Let's not circumvent it with IVF or fertility medicine. Let's not circumvent it with AI and robotics. let's get to the core and do actual restorative reproductive medicine, which I think is a vast improvement to what we've been doing. But it's not sexy. It takes a little bit more time. And it doesn't come with $1 billion paycheck to the fertility industry. But yeah, every step it seems like we're just getting further and further away from just that natural.
I'm going to push back a little bit though.
Yeah.
Because I think that it could be potentially very sexy if we approach it the right way. It's a lot more sexy than a lab doing it for you.
Well, right. I guess I meant it wasn't sexy in the like tech savvy, everything tech way that like sexy to like mainstream. It is, but yes, no, I agree. It can be sexy. And maybe it's a marketing problem. We just need to market it better.
Yes. Well, restore people's sex lives is
there you go.
Pitch that to Bobby Kennedy Jr. Moving on. So if we have AI now being able to conceive children in a laboratory, I discussed with Dr. Cariati about in vitro gametogenesis and how, and just to refresh everyone, that is the creation of gametes from other cells like skin cells or hair cells in the body. And they have successfully done this in mice, I believe, and created an embryo from 2 male mice, I think. I think that was it. But
I think you're correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, once we can, I think the beauty about being human and when we have humans behind these technologies, there's a very like human pace that we can go when we're recreating people or making people. But once you have got machines doing the whole process where they can create the gametes, then create the embryos, then we're creating wombs as well now, and like the number, like it. I mean, I can only think to like conveyor belts of like cows being slaughtered or chickens in cages. Like it really brings this agricultural, not regenerative agriculture, but like caged animals and like battery farmed everything agriculture.
Yeah.
Like it's bringing that kind of vibe and perhaps a little matrixy, but it's really the potential is terrifying. Like I don't know if dystopian covers it anymore. Like it's really beyond anything that I think anyone could conceptualize.
Yeah. And the fact that, I don't know how optimistic they're being, but science is saying give it 10 years. Give it 10 years and we'll have in vitro gametogenesis. We'll have these technologies. So yeah, very much we have Gattaca on our way, right? Like I remember watching that film have you seen that film?
I haven't. And you asked me this in our last episode and I was meant to watch it and I still haven't.
You still need to watch it.
You still need to watch it again.
Because it's basically that. I mean, people in the film, the premise is like people don't have sex to have children because that's not the preferred way. That's not the responsible way. So they create. Anyway, this is in our backyard. It's no longer science fiction. And it's really sobering to me when I read articles saying that they are fervently working on IVG and that it is so close. Because I deal with I have surrogate mothers contact me. I have children. I can't say children because they're adults now, but children or adults who are donor conceived. I have so many folks who contact the Center for Bioethics and Culture who want to share their story, and we can't even get that right. And now we're going to add a whole new onslaught of things if this technology is allowed to take off. But yeah, so you're right. I mean, eventually, who knows? You could make a baby from your skin cells and you could, all of that done through AI and robotics, and then you put that baby in their artificial womb, and then in 9 months you have a baby and you've manufactured it from start to finish.
And not just a baby, but a human being with a conscience who's going to be like,
what did you do?
Like, yeah, but like, where did I come from? Like, where, like, what? Like, it's going to be a legitimate question. That was actually a movie back in the day that my mum used to have playing so that she didn't have to take us through the birds and bees. It was like, did I come from, and what's happening to me? And that is going to take on a whole new meaning coming into the future, yeah, again, it's nearly impossible to wrap your head around that, what that could look like.
But only for the wealthy. I think we've missed a point here too, is that I'm often asked, like, who gets these technologies? And so it's the rich who buy and the poor who have to sell. And this is no different in this case. It's a young college student. I mean, I talked to Liz Schreier, who is from We Are Egg Donors, and she sold her eggs to keep her mom from being evicted. And who purchased those eggs? Probably someone who's very wealthy. Who purchases a surrogate mother or 20 surrogate mothers to have 20 children? Certainly not the middle income bracket. But do you know what I mean? Like, this is like, there's definitely also this huge, and in a world where we're trying, or people are constantly telling us to, you know, to get rid of divides, and we're creating one of the biggest divides by, these are expensive technologies. So that's just something else, food for thought. You know, these are expensive. Only wealthy people can can genome their entire embryo's DNA. So.
Oh, well, Kallie, thank you so much for coming in. Thank you for having this discussion with me. I hope that this has been food for thought for everyone. I actually ended with Dr. Cariati that maybe the suggestion was made that we should all have a cup of ginger tea to help digest some of that information, and perhaps I will make that suggestion to everyone again, because it is a lot of information. I mean, if it's not the line you've gone down, it can be quite confronting about where we're going. My personal hope is that with declining birth rates, we won't actually have the number of people we need to be able to run this technology. And so it kind of phases out and we have to just go back to the natural ways of being. It would make things a lot less complicated. But in the case that is not an issue, I think it is really important for us to have this information so that we can be prepared in the future. So again, thank you so much for joining me, Kallie. If people want to find you, they want to learn more. You did say that Venus Rising was your previous podcast. Are you no longer there?
We are no longer there. They're all still up. They're there for people to read. There's 5 seasons. There's over 80 episodes of, I was rapidly writing down, I think I have over 10 or 12 just from donor conceived individuals themselves. And so I would recommend people, you can find that wherever you listen to your podcast, just Venus Rising. If you want to find our films, they're all free on YouTube. Unfortunately, that means there's some advertisements, so I'm sorry. But they're all free on our YouTube channel. And you can find our website, cbc-network.org. We have, we're an educational nonprofit. We have tons of educational materials. I have an entire comprehensive report on the harms of each of these technologies, medical harms. And we've also conducted our own research on surrogate mothers in the United States. So that's there. I'm on Twitter at @Cal_Fell. You can find and follow me there. I post everything that my interviews with surrogate mothers and that sort of thing onto Twitter or to X. Sorry, Elon. Yeah, not Twitter, X. You can tell I'm old when I say Twitter. You're like, okay. But anyway, so yeah, I would just there's a wealth of stuff to sift through, and if anyone wants to email me with specific questions, I'm always open for that too, because I think like you've stated, there's a lot to digest, and I think just being willing to learn about these technologies and to put up a finger and think and say like, well, maybe this is a bad idea. I think that's a starting point. But so you can email me at kallie.fell@cbc-network.org. I'm happy to take emails.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Kallie. And also I will make sure that I post that in the show notes so that people can find it. I'm sure that I will be asking you to come back on because these technologies are moving quite rapidly, and these are conversations that need to continue on to put some form of brakes or just so that the general consciousness can look at this and consider some of the ethical quandaries around what we're introducing. So thank you, Kallie, so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. If this ignited a flame for you, please share, follow the show, and leave a review. The more support and subscriptions the show gets, the more powerful and credentialed guests I can bring on to deepen these conversations. I appreciate you being here, and I will see you next week.